everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
Hi, it's Jackie.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
So good, so good.
Oh, good.
So good. So good.
It's baseball season. Spring is in the air, and we have a super special guest joining us right off the baseball diamond. Who is it? It's our special guest, Dr. Stacie Bancroft. Hi, Stacie.
Hello. Hi. How are you?
We're really good. It's nice and warm in our studio where we have to turn the fan and air conditioning off. So, you know.
It's very impressive. All of your equipment, and it's
Oh,
very
no.
fancy. I've been to 2 recordings of Wait, Don't Tell Me, and I've got to tell you, you're just
Oh,
about
wow.
on par with
Wow.
NPR at this point.
Yes.
Wow, what
Got
a
our engineer, Julius, he's sitting in the booth, right?
Giving a thumbs up right now.
Give a
Hey,
thumbs up.
Julius.
Turn me up. Turn my mic up. Turn my mic up, Julius.
We're just
Oh.
kidding.
But this isn't a podcast comparing ourselves to other podcasts. No, this is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research. Every week we pick a topic, find some relevant articles, and certainly if we have a special guest, usually one of those articles is written by our special guest. And this week is no exception. We'll be talking all about chaining. The process of using a chain to tie things down in case of inclement weather. No! What? What is No,
I don't
Diana,
think that's even a
that joke
thing.
didn't work? No. I'm sorry.
You should probably board your windows.
Okay, you could do that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
But we'll be talking all about chaining. We have 3 articles that we will be discussing tonight, and they are a comparison of procedural variations in teaching behavior chains, manual guidance, trainer completion, and no completion of untrained steps by Bancroft, Weiss, Libby, and Ahearn. And that's in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis 2011. So, Stacie, that's your article.
Yes.
In case you
In
didn't
case
know.
you didn't know,
It seems
you were
like we're
confused for a
fairly
minute.
familiar, yes.
We'll also be talking about an assessment of the efficiency of and child preference for forward and backward chaining by Slocum and Tiger, also in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis in 2011. And then we'll be ending with what, we thought was kind of a fun use of chaining a little bit outside the box, chaining functional basketball sequences, parentheses, with embedded conditional discriminations, in an adolescent with autism by Lambert, Copeland, Karp, Finley, Huchens-Juarez, and Ledford. And that's in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2016.
Woo!
Exciting.
Spooky. So before we talk about the concept of chaining, Stacie, as our special guest, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourselves to the listeners?
I'm Stacie, and I have, I have been doing some research in chaining that's where I kind of started off with my research a while back. And these days, I do a little bit more with topics related to developing leisure repertoires for individuals with developmental disabilities and improving quality of life. So we still do kind of a wide scope of studies, but everything kind of applies to leisure these days. And we've been able to take a lot of the early work we did with chaining and procedural variations in chaining and apply that to a lot of the stuff that we're doing now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. And you're missing a big important part of yourself.
Which part would that be?
That you're the president of Babbitt.
That's true.
That's big.
true.
And where do you work?
I work at the New England Center for Children.
Neat.
Yep. And of course,
Charge you some stuff over there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I work through Western New England University as well. And then, of course, my most important job would be being on the board of advisors for Regis College.
That is true.
ABA program.
Oh, so much nepotism on this podcast. My God.
You do run in some similar circles.
We do, yeah.
Your fellow WINU alum.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. So why don't we get started by talking about that initial research, Stacie? Actually, before we
Yeah.
do that, we should probably make sure that everyone is fully aware of what chaining is. I was confused at the top with my joke, and Diana didn't think it was funny. So why don't we talk about what chaining really is?
People get scared of chaining.
I don't know why.
Really?
I think it's great. I think it's one of those things. Actually, I think it was when I was still working at the New England Center for Children, and your research had been finished.
Yeah.
And I think it was Julie who did a presentation on the article and was sort of showing everyone like this is kind of what we're working on and this is what we're seeing in the
Oh,
results.
yeah.
And I thought what a cool thing. I love an article that has the purpose of, we have so many ways to do things. Which one is the most efficient? Or is there one that's most efficient? Because so much of what we do is about time and good time management and efficiency. And I see so many people who are like, oh, chaining, it's like a TA, and I do total task, and it's exactly the same, and I've never thought about doing it any different. And it's so weird to me that you wouldn't want to, look into the research that's out there talking about how to improve the use of chaining.
Yeah, I think that people get a little nervous about teaching behavior chains and doing TAs because what you're typically teaching when you're doing this stuff is complex behavior. And so, these are, not discrete responses. It's something that's usually fairly complicated, right? So we're doing this for a lot of things like toothbrushing and showering. And then, a lot of the work that I do now is teaching leisure skills, like complex leisure skills. Like, this is how you play Sudoku. This is how you golf, like these are really complex skills that have a lot of, and I think going back to, talk about it in the basketball article, but there's a lot of, conditional discriminations that need to occur in these chains and these complex chains. So I think that that's where it gets tough for people because you're teaching complex skills. And then there are so many different ways that you can go about that, of course, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of end up in a situation where you almost have too many choices. And so I think going in and looking at the research and identifying which of the procedural variations are likely to work best for you and kind of heading down that road is a good way to approach it.
Yeah, and for the students out there, I know that a lot of students get confused about the difference between a task analysis and a behavior chain. Can you kind of give us that distinction?
Yeah, I think there's probably some loose lingo where people refer to it all as
loosey-goosey,
TAs.
yeah.
Right? Some loosey-goosey language where everyone calls it as TAs. But technically speaking, TAs or task analysis refers to the process of task analyzing some sort of complex behavior into its component steps into a chain. And then behavior chaining is the process of teaching those independent steps that you've task analyzed into a connected chain. And by a connected chain, what we mean is that you have a series of steps and that each step in that chain functions as a discriminative stimulus for the next response. And that each response also functions as a reinforcer for the previous response. So you really are chaining this kind of behavior and really to kind of think of it as a chain where you're adding one link on either later and later in the process or earlier and earlier in the process is a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Yeah, because I know a lot of people get confused or they're like, oh, but I'm just using a TA, right? And they might be, but they're not really talking about it technically, and that's smart. And that's good for you to separate the two out.
Right.
And I think that a lot of times, a default strategy is to kind of go for this total task approach, and that's okay, and that has merit, and that has been found to be effective in some ways. But I think that the important part to remember is that you have to be linking these steps together. So it's not just that you're training, maybe a 15 steps independently, and when they get them all, you're good. Each step has to occasion the next step. And so if you're not linking them together, if you're not turning each response into a discriminative stimulus for the next response, then you're not creating this linked chain where you're likely to have independence in the future.
It's such a good metaphor when you talk about it like that way, right? Like each behavior is the link for the previous behavior, and that's how you get that reinforcement that's flowing throughout, right, until you get to the final reinforcer at the end, which might just be finishing the chain, or it might be having a tied shoe.
Yeah, and I think that linking them is a huge part of it. To go with that metaphor, imagine if you were to make an actual metal chain and you were to just make each of the links but not connect them, it's not going to do you much good. And the same thing for this. So you can teach all these parts, but if you're not connecting them and making sure that they're functioning as an SD for the next step and a reinforcer for the past step, then you're not going to have the independence and someone engaging that chain moving forward.
Yeah.
One time I made a bubblegum wrapper chain.
Oh, yes, I did that in fourth grade. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I did it when I was in college.
Oh,
but,
really?
It's okay. I don't know. I thought it was like cool and retro, and then I hung it all around. It was super long. I hung it all around my dorm room. It was that long.
Yeah.
But to fold those things is
impressive.
Actually a behavior chain in and of itself.
That's correct.
Because they're actually kind of tricky to
Yes,
fold.
you learned
and
that
you have
chain
to know
at some
how
point.
to put
Chaining
together.
Chaining.
Yeah. But the other point I wanted to make
is...
So meta.
That's why I brought it up, y'all, to sound so smart. But the other point I think, too, is that this is not just like a trick that we use in order to teach someone who might have a developmental disability how to do something. We all engage in behavior chains throughout our day, because there are many behaviors that I have that are
absolutely
chained together. And if I get lost in the middle of it or interrupted in the middle of it, I can't complete it, right? I have to go back.
Can I tell you a quick story about this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So we were just talking before this. My sons are 5 and 3. My oldest just turned 5. And so I have just entered into the world of sports parents. We've just started T-ball.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's a whole new day. And so I'm experiencing T-ball for the first time, right? And so I'm sure you guys have done the whole T-ball thing. And for anyone that doesn't know, it's hysterical. You know, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is so funny. And what cool examples of developing behavior chains in this process, right? So like the way that T-ball works is you have some practice time and then they play the game right after. And they're 4 and 5-year-olds. So, I mean, they're like laying down at various points. They're like, you know, just throwing, you know, pieces of grass at points. So the big thing they want to do in teaching like this kind of like basics of baseball is go up, hit the ball, and run to first base. Go up, hit the ball, and run to first base, right? And so it was interesting watching the coaches try to teach this chain. They haven't asked me for a consultation yet, so...
You snip a little letter.
Yeah.
Dear coach, this is what I do for my life.
They're like, ma'am, please be quiet and sit down in the stands. And so the first one, they tried this kind of didactic approach, right? And they're like, okay, guys, what you're going to do is hit the ball, and then you're going to run to first base, right? And so like that didn't work at all. That was like completely ineffective. So like the kids would like hit the ball and then they would stand there. Or they would like hit the ball and like one kid did run, but he ran to third base.
Right, yeah, that will happen. Or they won't put the bat down.
Or they don't take the bat down. Right, then there's another kid that hit it, and then he went and got it, like after he hit it.
That's so cute.
So then the next time they do this, and during the practice, they do this drill. And the drill was hit the ball, run to first base, run to second base, run to third, and run home. That takes so much time and energy for 4 and 5-year-olds that they really only got like 2 rounds of practice in. And it was a lot of extras when all they really needed to be learning was running to first base after they hit the ball. And so that was like a little more effective, but you still had kids, like one kid like hit it and like walked to first base, but then like he passed the ball on the way and like picked it up and handed it to the other team. And then like another kid again just like laid down like halfway through to first base. So then the most recent practice, I noticed now they're like honing in on this, and they had them run these drills again where it was like hit the ball, run to first base, and then just come right on back and get in line and hit the ball. And they got so many more trials in that time. And it was like effective.
Right.
It worked. Like, I mean, like 80%. It works. And they would like hit the ball, and that's like takes 10 tries anyhow. Right. Yeah. Eventually they hit the ball, and then they were actually running to first base. So it's really kind of, you know, breaking this down and like figuring out like, all right, what are the steps that we have to actually link together here? And it was just cool to watch that happen.
Yeah. I like that.
So you got to learn all your conditional discriminations of, okay, you hit the ball this side, so don't run because that's a foul ball. You hit the ball this way, you got to run.
Not
hit the ball
yet.
up, don't run because they might catch it. But if they don't catch it, then you run.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
First base, we're not there yet.
Yeah, you got to run through, run this way, don't run that way, because there's lots of... When you get to the fun part of baseball where you think you watch everyone play baseball, they just stand there.
Yes.
But everything in baseball is about so many conditional discriminations. They hit the ball over here. So even though the ball is way on the other side, you should be backing this person up. So run to this position. And then this person runs to that position. Like you always have to do something every single play. But again, you don't learn that till you're 11, 12, then they start putting all of that in. But I never knew how much you actually had to do in baseball. I thought, I'll stand here. If the ball comes, I'll catch it. And if it doesn't, I will continue to stand here.
Right.
And nope.
We had to chew this very large wad of gum. Yeah. That's what they look like they're doing.
We had a friend from a foreign country, and I brought her to our like softball game, and I told her that too. I said, yeah, just hit the ball and run to the bases, but forgot to inform her that you stop at each base.
Oh, she just kept going.
So she ran the whole bases, and everyone's like, what is she doing? And
Bedelia did.
Yeah, she kept running, got to home, and we're like, okay. Yeah. And like everyone was just like, the pitcher's like holding the ball.
Right.
And she's just running.
Right.
But it's true. So there was no chain there.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is, I mean, that's not just like a baseball thing.
No.
That's most of the things that we do are these really complex chains that aren't just like this kind of single path of a chain. Like there are all these conditional discriminations that kind of branch off in different directions. And if this happens, you have to do this. And it sends you down a whole different chain. And the process of overtly teaching each of those steps under the right context and the right conditions it can be complicated.
So when it comes to teaching chains, I think, most behavior analysts are pretty good at the idea of, okay, I've got to task analyze whatever the chains are. So I'm going to make an elaborate list, and then maybe I'll make a sandwich myself, and I'll write down my steps. And then I will sort of...
It's just an excuse to eat a sandwich.
Yeah. Right? It's always eat a sandwich. Eat a sandwich, brush your teeth. It's the only chains we've ever taught.
Right.
And then so I'm going to get my student, and I'm going to, I'll show them the chain. Maybe I'll model it once, and then I'll prompt them. I'll give them probably a motor prompt, and then something. And I think one of the things that is great about, your research and your article, Stacie, is the idea that there are lots of ways that prompt can go in terms of the type of prompt and then how we move through that chain. I think most folks are familiar with the total task, the idea of, okay, well, I'll prompt them on the first step, and if they get it right, they'll get, their top reinforcer, and then I'll sort of just go through the rest of the chain somehow. Maybe I'll prompt them. Maybe I'll just demonstrate the rest of the chain. Maybe I'll stop. I don't know. But there's so many different options. And so I know the work you looked at was, well, which of those is the best option? Or in terms of best, which one is going to have the best amount of additional learning without additional training and take the least amount of time? Because anyone who's run a task, any sort of chaining procedure, broken down a skill and task analysis knows that a lot of times it feels like they never get learned and there's a million steps and they can take a long time to teach because they're complex.
Yes.
So how did you were you just interested in the phenomenon of chaining and you're like, I need to do research about this, or you kind of fell into the research?
I would say falling into it was probably accurate.
Gracefully falling.
I typically don't fall gracefully.
It was a ball pit fall.
Yes. So I was working with Myrna Libby, and she was doing some research with Julie Weiss on behavior chains, and we had my master's thesis was on forward versus backward chaining, it was most to least versus least to most. That's right. Thank you. We did a few of them. Right. Thank you. So it was most to least versus least to most prompting. And so that was looking at some procedural variations. And so then we were just looking at some more, and we were like, okay, well, this is like kind of, territory where people are just really kind of, like you said, doing kind of willy-nilly what they think might be best to do, and trying to figure out, well, what is the best way and what is going to produce the most efficient learning. The way we had run this kind of series of studies looking at procedural variations in TAs was with this really cool setup using Lego constructs. Skill acquisition and looking at procedural variations for skill acquisition and different teaching strategies from an experimental design standpoint can be complicated and tough to run sometimes, because if you want to run like a multiple baseline design, what are your different contexts going to be? And so, this is where you get a lot of studies that will, maybe use like nonsense words or symbols or something like that. So we used some kind of arbitrary Lego constructs where we had made sure that for each condition, the constructs were different but equally challenging. They were completely arbitrary. They weren't constructs of any, like a house or anything like that. It was just different ways of putting these Legos together, different colors, different shapes, different directions that you'd put them. So we had that laid out for each condition. And we just started testing different ways. And the ways that we had kind of seen folks were using clinically were either manually guiding the student through the rest of the steps. So in a forward chain, after you get the training step, manually guiding them through the rest of these steps. And then another one was student complete. So just kind of letting them kind of go through and finish the rest of the steps. And then there was no complete, which was just like, you don't do it. After the training step, you're done and you start over again. There was teacher complete, student complete, where you're manually guiding them. Sorry, I think I misspoke there. And then the no complete. And so it was just kind of comparing them and trying to figure out how could they learn most quickly? What took the fewest trials? What took the least amount of time to train, both in session and just in total? In the end, we find that the student complete and the teacher complete were pretty close to each other and produced learning in the fewest amount of trials, but the no complete took the least amount of time overall. So like going back to the baseball idea again, kind of just practicing this, you can get in more trials, and maybe it might take you more trials to learn the skill, but you're able to get that in less time because you're not going through manually guiding them through these steps or having to do these steps yourself.
I'm going to make a clarification for the audience. And so when you're talking about these different ways to finish, what sort of procedure were you using? Were you using forward, backward, total task?
This is looking at a forward chain, right? So you're gonna teach step 1 of the chain, and then deliver the reinforcer, and then what do you do with say it's a 10-step chain? What do you do with the last 9 steps? With the teacher complete, the teacher is just going to do those 9 steps themselves. So with a Lego, they're going to put the last 9 pieces of the Lego together, right? With the student complete, you're going to actually manually guide the student through that process. And with the no complete, you're not putting you're taking apart the first piece you put together and starting again at the beginning. So there's just 2 different ways. And you can see how the teacher complete and the student complete would potentially take advantage of observational learning.
Maybe.
Potentially. Potentially. Right. And that was actually something that was really interesting leading up to this study. We were looking at what people were doing. And I remember watching a lot of teachers training behavior chains and doing some sort of completion strategy where it was either they were completing it or they were manually guiding the student to complete it. And I remember seeing all these situations where their teacher is completing the last steps of the chain and the student's like looking out the window and like not even attending.
They're like, oh, it's your turn now.
Yeah. Time for a quiet break in my mind.
Right.
And so, I think, obviously for them to benefit from observational learning, like they have to be observing to some extent, right?
Yes.
Or you would see folks doing the manual guidance of the untrained steps, and the student is being manually guided to do those last steps, but they're still staring out the window and they're just not,
Oh, yeah.
And then in those cases, like, maybe you have a kid that is really not able to engage in the task for very long. So maybe you've got like 10 minutes tops before you really lose focus and you're no longer, you have to take a break and you have to kind of stop this for a while. And if you're burning 7 minutes of that 10-minute time doing all these steps for a kid that's not even observing the steps, it's a waste of teaching time.
Yeah. So was the no complete kind of came from that genesis of, wait a minute, sometimes the students aren't watching, so what if we just didn't complete it? Or were there individuals who'd come to that conclusion of like, this student's not the greatest at observational learning, so I'm just going to call it and then go back and practice again?
I think that it was kind of materializing in some clinical settings, and we just wanted to look at it. I think that it also is really related to what we see, kind of similar to what we see with mass trials. I will say that in the research that my lab is doing now, for several of the leisure studies that we're working on, we teach very complex leisure skills to kids of all different functioning levels. And we have had 100% success doing this with probably at this point, at least, 60 activities across all kinds of different participants. And these are complex skills that we're teaching. And yes, sometimes it does take a solid year, but that's for something like checkers, and like that's a really cool skill for someone to have for the rest of their life, because I don't want to slide too much into my leisure spiels here, but particularly in adult settings, folks can spend, some estimates are as much as 60% of their awake time in unstructured downtime.
Yep.
And so it's like, what are you doing? What is this individual going to do for 60% of the rest of their life? Right? And so we have to be able to give them things to fill that with. So that falls into a lot of these complex skills that we have to teach often with behavior chaining.
Mm-hmm. So do you generally default to no complete now?
I would say that would probably be my default. And I know in the article that we say, student complete and teacher complete have their merits because they took the fewest number of trials. And there are certainly individuals who have outstanding observational learning. And those folks, by all means, do that sort of thing. But
a lot of daily living skills you have to complete one way or the other, right? Like you can't just stop mid-toothbrush.
Yes, although my recommendations...
I've done that. I've stopped.
Spit. Why am I wasting my time
Rinse
here?
this and start again. Reset.
I do lean more towards no complete of those untrained steps because I want to focus on developing the chain where it is. And usually my recommendation for, something like that is go in and have them take a teacher turn or a mom turn or whatever and brush their teeth really well. And then later on, go in and run your chain, or even in that session. But do one round of like a good toothbrushing, and then go in and just do the steps that you're training, and previously mastered steps. And then you don't have to finish the chain and have them brush their teeth fully, 15 times in a row, obviously.
Yeah, no.
So
just do a final rinse and then you're done.
Yeah.
The dentist probably would recommend this as well, right? Because if we're teaching the skill, they're probably not cleaning their teeth well, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, everyone should be brushing
any
their
way
teeth.
that you can get to properly cleaning your teeth,
you
would
just
be
do
appreciated.
Yeah. And so we're teaching all these complex skills, not activities of daily living, but leisure skills. And the reason, so when we first did this, we were like, okay, we'll probably lean towards no complete of the untrained steps. But then we were trying to come up with, like, well, what if we kind of made a hierarchy of remediation strategies? And we were like, okay, so if they get stuck, the first thing we'll try is, pulling out the step that they got stuck on and running mass trials of that step connected with the previously mastered step. And then we had a list of probably like 8 other ideas from remediation strategies that we would kind of move down that hierarchy. We've never, ever moved past mass trials.
Wow.
Mass trials have been effective every single time that we have gotten stuck on a chain. So what that looks like is, you're on step 3 of a forward chain. So they do step 1 by themselves, right? That occasions step 2. They do step 2 by themselves. Then you get to the training step and you provide whatever prompt is necessary on step 3, and they're just stuck and they can't seem to get it. We remove steps 2 and 3, and we run mass trials of like, okay, you do 2, and then we give the prompts on 3, and then we just rotate around, and we just do that over and over and over again. And sometimes we'll do that 100 times, but in a short period of time because they're quick trials because you're only doing those steps. We've had incredible success with that and have really been able to get over any point where we've been stuck on these chains doing that. So it's kind of like not complete of untrained steps.
Are there things you would look for in terms of not using a forward chain, no complete chaining prompt procedure? Like if the student just seems really intent, that their eyes are always on what their hands are doing, any sort of kind of prerequisites you sort of would generally look for?
I think that's a good point. I think that obviously if you have someone that is very interested in the activity, if you have someone that's very focused, if you have someone that can attend for a really long period of time, even if they're interested in the activity, again, you're kind of burning some time at the end there if you're going through those steps. So you really have to have someone that can focus and is observing, as will look at the task. And what you're hoping when you're doing, student complete or teacher complete of those untrained steps is that eventually when you get to training those steps, that they'll learn them more quickly, or maybe they'll even show proficiency in a probe before that and become independent with the chain because they've picked up on it. But yeah, someone that really is attending well, someone that's really observing. Otherwise, I say don't bother and just, no complete, as many trials as you can. This is a number of learning opportunities, number of trials sort of thing. So as many trials as you can get in, and you can just get in so many more if you take out those final steps that you haven't focused on training yet. And the other thing that I think was really cool, I've always wanted to do a follow-up study on this, is I wonder what the long-term maintenance would have been like in that study if you can compare it across student complete, teacher complete, and no complete.
Right, yeah.
Because they're getting in more trials of the no complete in shorter periods of time. And so does that have an improved effect on long-term maintenance? So that's a possibility and another potential advantage.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the results right now of that paper, and like the duration is like pretty significant. It goes from like 31 minutes to the longest, which is 204 minutes, which is a long time.
That is.
200 divided by 60 is math.
It's like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's a lot. That's something to think about too.
Yeah.
And that's just to build the arbitrary Lego structures too.
Just to build an arbitrary Lego construct. That's not to do some really complex skill that's going to take a really long time if you go through all of those untrained steps. So, nowadays in doing a lot of chaining in the lab in the context of other studies, I think that we 8 times out of 10 lean towards no complete of those untrained steps.
Would you even do no complete with a backward chain?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That might be fun.
Yeah.
Right?
No complete. That's the way to go, it sounds like.
I think I've done that before when I had like 10 shirts that were almost already pre-folded. And then I just had them and I just threw them at them, right?
Yep.
To complete that little like last smooth. That's like my favorite.
Yeah, it requires a little bit more setup ahead of time in a lot of situations, but
I've been thinking I think it's actually 3.5 hours.
That's okay.
Okay. So
thanks, mathematician.
Good to know.
That was delayed.
I know, right?
All right. Well, while we're on the subject of different prompts, forwards versus backwards, I want to come back to that. But first, let's take a little break. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
We are back, and we're talking about chaining with our special guest, Dr. Stacie Bancroft. But before we get back into the idea of the ever combative forward versus backward chaining discussion, I want to make sure that all of our listeners out there, if they're interested, hear that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to this podcast, you can apply for one Type 2 CE. You're going to need to listen. Go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs, and enter in a secret code word to make sure that you listened to all the exciting stuff we talked about in this episode. And the first of those secret code words, we got one now, and we'll have one again later. And the first one is cookout. 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 Did everyone go to a cookout this weekend? Cookouts, yeah?
I did not go to a cookout.
We had one.
No, good. What'd you have? Anything good?
Oh, you know, we had all the kids do hot dogs over the fire, which was a bunch of 5-year-olds doing hot dogs over fire, which it's okay.
Plan.
They're okay.
Yeah. Everyone's okay. Everyone survived. All right. Everyone made it through the cookout. before we took our break, we were talking specifically about the forward chain procedure and talking about maybe how that, how you could use the no complete with a backward chain. Would you guys all mind just humoring me and just kind of going through the main differences between the forward and the backward chain? Because I know a lot of people, not me, I know it perfectly, but a lot of other people really have a hard time, I think, differentiating between the different types of chaining procedures, forward, backward versus, say, total task. And I know we've been focusing on forward chaining, but if you were going to use backward chaining, how is that different? Or how would a behavior analyst explain that to a parent or to another individual?
Let's take a simple example. So how about putting a shirt on?
I do that every day.
Yeah. Got that? Sure, there are some variations, but probably we're going to say that you open up the shirt, put your head through the head hole, put one arm through one sleeve, put another arm through another sleeve, and then pull it down, right? And so with a forward chain, you would start, remember with the chain, you're teaching one link at a time and you're connecting them together. So with a forward chain, you are starting with teaching opening up that shirt, okay? And again, if you do that with the no complete, then you're just going to run mass trials with whatever, prompting strategy or that you have in place. And you're just going to run mass trials of opening up the shirt until you get independence in opening up the shirt. Now you have that step done. Okay. Now you're moving forward in your chain, right?
Whoa, slow down there.
So the second step is putting your head through the head hole. So they've already got opening up the shirt. So that happens, and that should be independent. And if that doesn't happen, then you've got issues and you have to go back and retrain that,
go back
right?
2 spaces.
So you've got the opening up the shirt, and now you're going to provide whatever prompts are necessary to put the head through the head hole. And then you run that out, opening up the shirt, head through the head hole, opening up the shirt, head through the head hole, until putting your head through the head hole, putting their head through the head hole is independent, right? Moving forward, third link in the chain is putting one of the arms through the armhole. This is worth noting right here that sometimes we take our own neurotic tendencies about how we chain things together and try to apply that to our students. Sometimes we can be a little rigid, right? And so don't be too rigid going into these chains. I think that's where people get themselves into some trouble and get stuck on things. So for something like, putting your arms through the armhole, you don't have to identify like, okay, it needs to be the left arm first through the left hole and then the right arm through the right hole. Like just say that the next step is putting an arm through an armhole, right? I don't know that we always do that in the same order. So why would he expect these kids to do that? And so a lot of times I see people they task analyze these things and they make them too rigid. And that can cause problems.
So it's marked as an error if they put the left arm in first versus the right arm, where it doesn't really matter. And the end result is the shirt is on.
Yeah.
Right? So as long as the shirt is on and it's facing the right way.
Yeah. And it's okay for,
two arms, two different holes,
It's okay for your head to be through the head hole and that to occasion putting an arm through an armhole. It doesn't have to be specifically the left and then specifically the right.
I most definitely do it in the same order every time.
I do too.
But
you
it doesn't mean that that's the only way.
You know that you do?
Yep.
I don't know. I don't recall. Do you
My daughter also does.
I think I do my right. Because I'm right-handed. I think I do my right first. I don't know.
I think I toss it up.
Oh, good.
Do a different order, different days.
Pay attention tomorrow when I'm getting dressed.
Yeah.
This is my Tuesday way.
So that's then you teach the third step. And then once that, and you're chaining it together. So it's got to be the first step occasions the second occasions the third. And you're just continuing to move forward, training one more step, adding one more link to that chain moving forward. Backward chaining, same thing, except you're moving backwards. So now you have the untrained steps at the beginning. If you were teaching putting on a shirt with a backward chain, you would actually put them into the shirt and their head and their arms would each be through the armholes and would just be kind of scrunched up. The whole shirt be kind of scrunched up under their armpits, right? And it would just be running those trials of pulling the shirt down until they're independent with that step. And then once they have independence, then you want to move backwards and link the previous step to that final step. So now you're going to, set it up again. If you're doing the no complete, you just kind of do yourself quickly, get the head and one arm through, and you're going to train them to put that other arm through the armhole, and then they should be independent in pulling it down because you've already trained that step. Okay? And so you're just going to continue to back up and move your way through.
Right. So it's not like you're teaching them to do it in backwards order.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Sometimes people get
backwards
always the same order. It's
always
just a matter
order.
of where your training step is.
Where the
The backwards and forwards refers to the direction in which you're moving with adding links onto the chain. So the direction that you're moving and training in your training steps.
Stacie, when you said no complete with a backward chain would probably be a good way to go in terms of time savings, there are going to be backward chains that it's difficult to do a no complete.
Like the shirt.
You can't.
Yeah.
Just like have them pull a shirt out of midair would not be the best way to run that.
You don't have to manually guide them to other steps. You don't have to slowly go through each one. You can just kind of like throw it on them quickly, just get it there and get to that point where you are. And then in other situations, it is possible when there's no setup. It is possible just to jump to those final steps.
I think the more complex type of chains that have more conditional discrimination, you don't need as much setup. You don't have to have done at ABC to get to D. You could use that same no complete procedure.
Sure.
Okay. In terms of forward versus backward chain, which one should I use? They both sound great. If only there were research to help me.
Well, Rob.
There was.
In fact, there is. So Slocum and Tiger in 2011 tackled this precise question. They wanted to know what's going to be more efficient, forward versus backward chain. And they also wanted to know, which is an equally important question to ask, what did the participants prefer as far as their chaining procedure? Mm-hmm. All right.
Did you ever ask that, like, in the future, Stacie, about preference?
Have I done what in the future?
Have you ever, like, because I know, guys. So
that's not how forward chaining works.
Oh. No, I mean, did you ever ask for preference of completion of steps?
No, we did not.
So, guys, research.
Project.
That might be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
It would be.
Just wondering.
That would be, great because, like, one thing that we talked about in that study is that a lot of kids aren't going to like the manual guidance component of the student complete.
Uh-huh.
And so, again, it's going to be case specific.
Yeah, to show that that's actually true, that kids don't like being hand-over-handed 1,000 times.
Some do.
Some do, some don't. Right.
I love how Stacie immediately jumped to the conclusion that it always is, which is that it's idiosyncratic.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
It's like a foregone conclusion, right? That's what's going to happen. So I really liked this Slocum and Tiger study because they included that preference assessment at the end, which I'll talk about. But also because they did something kind of cool that we don't always see in our research, which is they went back in the annals and found an article that talked about chaining. It was kind of a older school, Spooner and Spooner, 1984.
You think they were married?
I don't know. It could have been a brother-sister duo.
I know. I love thinking about that.
Parent and child.
If anyone knows, write us in.
They might have just liked that show, Silver Spoons.
Man and dog. We don't know. We don't know.
Man and dog?
You don't publish with your pets?
I don't know if pets are allowed to publish in journals.
It's probably a question for another day.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation already.
Have you really?
Yep. We've already had this conversation.
It's a stupid conversation.
We've
already had it.
Episode. Yep.
Oh my God. We had too many episodes of this show.
Episode 59 puppies?
It was, and it evoked a lot of responding with our listeners, so we might want to move on from that.
Fine. All right, but they pulled out from the Spooner and Spooner article 2 hypotheses that they had presented, and I'm just going to quote them for you guys. So the first one is, a given individual will consistently demonstrate differential sensitivity to one teaching procedure with a given task. Okay, so that was kind of like the first hypothesis piece.
Okay. Sounds realistic.
Yeah. Okay. No, totally does. And then the second piece was, although sensitivities may be idiosyncratic, we should be able to predict those sensitivities based on an individual's history. All right? So they kind of like went into this with that background. And they wanted to test to see if that was really going to shake out as it was directly applied to forward and backward chaining.
That's neat. That was a late night discovery that they're like, I wonder.
I know, right? And I kind of like this approach because in our particular field, we don't come forward with hypotheses, right? We'd say, well, let's just see where the data lead us, and then we'll make our conclusions eventually. So it's kind of cool that they included this component. So the purpose that they really had here was twofold. First, do we see and or can we predict this type of sensitivity to a more efficient chaining procedure per individual? And then the B part was, do individuals have a preference?
Right.
Yeah.
And on a side note, it was Fred Spooner and Doreen Spooner.
Okay.
So they maybe were married. Or brother-sister.
Or just happened to like, wow, you have the same last name as me. And we're in the same lab.
They might.
So weird. I feel like that happens a lot in this field.
Huh.
Which is odd because it's not that large a field.
No, but I just think that I'm just imagining them like late night on their kitchen table, like rustling through articles, being like, this is a dream. This is a dream question, Fred.
They're doing the dishes together.
Yeah.
And
They're eating breakfast, talking about articles. I love that. My dream world.
It's so romantic.
I know.
What a romantic article we've made up.
So there were 4 participants in this study. None of them had an autism diagnosis, I'd like to point out. Mm-hmm. They were between the ages of 10 and 12, and they did have other varying diagnoses, such as ADHD and varied learning disabilities. And they felt that they might benefit from using this type of chaining to teach skills. What they were doing here, there were no Legos involved, sadly.
It's very sad. You know, I got a free trip to the Lego factory in Connecticut because of the research.
No.
That's crazy.
Julie Weiss and I got to go behind the scenes at the Lego factory. And did you know, if you work at the Lego factory, you get to shop at the Lego factory store. You know how Legos are super expensive?
Oh, yeah.
There's like a 60% discount or something for Lego employees.
What?
Oh no, Rob's gonna
So it is sad that they didn't.
Just go work at the Lego
It's
factory.
sad that they didn't use Lego. Missed opportunity.
Right? Seriously.
It is funny when I have students read the task analysis literature and the chaining literature, and they're like, another one with Legos?
Yes.
Awesome.
Like, yes, because it's the perfect comparison.
Right?
All right, so I'll tell you what they did instead in just a second. But they did initially they did 2 different preference assessments, and again, this was a very nicely laid out study because they started things off with a color preference assessment. Not because they actually needed to know what anyone's preferred color was, but because they needed to see if there was a bias towards a particular color. Mm-hmm. Because later on, they're going to use those colors as representative initial links in their concurrent chains.
That's smart, because if I was in this, I would always pick the green one, because that's my favorite color. So they would have figured that out in the preference assessment and chosen something other than green.
They picked like the moderate low.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Mm-hmm. And you know, too, that Slocum and Tiger did their homework, because it would be easy to get to that point and then finish your entire study and be like, we did it, guys! They're like, oh, shoot. We didn't check to see if that was their favorite color. Right? So they planned ahead. They did a good job. The other thing they checked on was their preference for varied leisure activities to use as reinforcers. So once that was taken care of, they needed to determine what were they going to actually teach for their task analysis in this study. And they wanted to make sure that they were keeping things relatively the same across these multiple comparisons they were going to do. Because they wanted to look at not just forward versus backward chaining, but also whether the length of chain was important to think about. So for each of these participants, they taught them 4 different chains: a 3-step, a 6-step, a 9-step, and an 18-step chain. Okay.
A lot of chains.
So many chains. And in order to, again, sort of keep things equal across this, they picked out 6 different, very simple motor tasks to do. Things like touch your head, clap your hands, touch your nose, touch your ears, touch your eyes. So for the 3-step chain, they just taught them 3 of those. For the 6-step, they taught them all of those. For the 9-step, they did the first 6, and then they rotated back through. And then for the 18-step, it was all 6 3 times in some varied order. And then to help the participants discriminate this, they gave each of those a name. So they called it Do the Blank Dance for the 3-step or the 6-step. I don't know what the names were. They didn't say, which I feel like is, again, a very much missed opportunity. Right? Like, what did they call them? Was it the chicken dance? Was it the blueberry dance? Was it the frog dance?
We'll never know.
We'll never know.
Lost to the annals of time.
I know. So that made me a little sad. But I can imagine, you can just use your own imagination to think about what maybe they named the dances.
The arbitrary repetitive dance.
That one's my favorite.
It's the one I do every morning.
All right, and then they taught them according to either using a forward chain or a backward chain for each of the participants. Following that was what they call their efficiency assessment, right? So like, let's see how long did it take to teach these tasks with the forward versus backward chain, so we have an idea of whether there's an advantage one over the other. And then following that, they did a preference assessment piece where they, again, used the concurrent operance arrangement in which they had an initial link, which was one of the color cards which they had associated with that chaining procedure. And then they had the participant select one of those and then access that particular chaining procedure with a novel chain as their kind of preference assessment. And then they looked to see which one did they pick more. So lo and behold, when they looked at their efficiency assessment, they found, guess what? That the results were idiosyncratic.
Wow.
Shocking.
Not only across participants, but for at least some participants, they were idiosyncratic within their own responding based on the length of the chain. Right? So we had Paul, Danielle, Katie, and Bella were our participants. For Paul, 3 out of the 4 chains that he was taught, the backward chain was more efficient. For Daniel, it was a complete toss-up. For Katie, it was a complete toss-up. And for Bella, 4 out of 4 chains were more efficiently taught using the forward chaining. It's a toss-up, right? It's a total toss-up. So for the preference assessment results, guess what happened?
Idiosyncratic?
You're right. Oh my gosh, Jackie.
It's like I've read it.
How'd you know? Yeah, so it turned out results were pretty much idiosyncratic there as well. For Daniel, his responding was, he had no preference for either the forward or backward chain. He chose both pretty much equally.
They're all great, guys.
Right? Either one is really fine. For Katie, perhaps she chose the backward chain like one more time than the forward chain. And those were the 2 folks whose efficiency results were like a toss-up, right? For Paul, he selected the forward chain almost exclusively, but you may recall that the efficiency results showed that the backward chain was actually better for him. Mm. And then for Bella, towards the end of her preference assessment, she was selecting the backward chain more often than the forward chain. However, you may recall that in her efficiency evaluation, the forward chain was most effective. Mm. So, what does that tell us, guys? Preference for particular chaining procedure and efficiency of a particular chaining procedure may not match. And the differences that they saw between them overall were relatively slight. Mm.
I wonder how long this would take. So if we're thinking about, teachers and what they're going to use, I wonder how long, like that preference assessment and kind of sussing out the 2 chains would take. Probably not a day. Probably longer than that.
It would take longer than a day.
Yeah.
You could teach.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that might be hard. I'm trying to gleam,
yeah,
what teachers can do.
Right. So do you want to know what I take from this study?
I do.
Hot take.
I would say the hot take is don't worry about it.
Yep.
That's my take
on
this one.
I totally agree. I read this one and was so excited. Like, you know what? I think they even phrase in there, I guess the behavior analysts just pick whichever one they prefer.
They do, yeah. So that
time is tight in teaching all the things that we have to teach, and please don't go and try to assess for different types of activities whether your student learns more efficiently with backward versus forward, or if they prefer one or the other. I think this was a good study to take a look at this, but like I said, the point that I get from it is don't worry about it. And what I would recommend in choosing whether you're going to use a forward or a backward chain is, again, looping back around to our metaphor of an actual chain. You want to start off with as big of a chain as you can. So if you have more independent steps at the beginning, so maybe steps 1, 2, and 3, they've already got down. They've got it.
Right.
Build off of that. Don't wait until later on to attach that to something that you knew that you're building. Build off of those 3 links you already have. So go with a forward if they can already do those first 3 steps. you can determine that quickly with a probe at the beginning of training. If they have the 3 steps at the end that they're independent on, and maybe they've picked it up through observational learning or something like that. Yeah, exactly. Then start with a backward chain, right? So build off of the biggest chunk of chain you already have leading into teaching.
Big old chunk of chain.
Big chunk of chain. Yep.
Love it. That's great.
So yeah, I think that's probably the take-home point from it is like, don't get too caught up in that and just kind of work on building this as big and strong of a chain as you can.
I think it's good for our listeners to hear that, right, though, because we always do stress, like, go to the literature, use the literature. And in this case, we're using it to say it doesn't matter. But I think they might be like, okay, I need to replicate this and make sure that it doesn't matter for my student. But in this case, we don't think you do.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And the fact that they found idiosyncratic results within participant, it's not like, oh, you do this and then every chain I teach this student, it should be a forward chain or a backward chain, right? It doesn't seem to matter that much. So they did not confirm Fred and Doreen Spooner's hypotheses that they put forward, right? They said it really doesn't matter. Do what works. And if your student if it doesn't seem to make a difference for their learning, then you could actually see what your therapists prefer.
And there's a lot of studies that, will do a social validity assessment and assess preference for one teaching strategy over another. But for this one, I have to say, I have a hard time hypothesizing why someone would prefer one over the other. I mean, the context, when you think about what it looks like going through that process of learning the chain and everything, it's going to be kind of a similar setting. So you still get your reinforcer in there. So I think it makes sense to me that it would be just kind of idiosyncratic from activity to activity.
But I do think determining preference for that no complete versus full manual guidance through might be more telling.
Yeah, I think knowing that someone does not like to have manual guidance for untrained steps is important to know, or you might be injured.
Right.
It's very true.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the specifics of the chaining procedure and training chains, but I do want to make sure we get at least one article related to using chaining to teach a cool skill. And we don't want to do putting on a shirt. We don't want to do brushing teeth. We kind of talked about those in our examples. So let's talk about basketball. So Stacie, I know your lab works a lot on leisure skills.
Yes.
And you mentioned checkers. What are some other leisure skills that you've used chaining to teach?
Oh, boy. We have done word searches. We've done Sudoku. We've done friendship bracelets. We've done basketball, like playing horse or something like that. We've done playing darts. We've done golfing. We've done all kinds of different puzzle kind of games. We've done board games. We've done multiplayer games. We've done video games. We've done all kinds of crafts. We've really had a lot of different complex leisure skills that we've taught.
There's something I would think video games probably sound like almost the closest to playing the game of basketball like they did in this study, because there are so many more conditional discriminations in some of the other games you mentioned, which either are relatively solo effort of a chain, or there's sort of a turn-taking component, so there aren't that many discriminations that pop up, or when they do, they're very clearly cued. I'd rather hear about video games than basketball, but unfortunately, that's the article we got on basketball. Yeah. When we were kind of looking for interesting articles, I saw basketball and I said, that's the one, because that sounds like the kind of thing of, man, if you can teach like an actual game of basketball using chaining, like that's it. Like you got it. Then chaining is the best, and we should all be using it a lot more than we do. Because I think one of the problems that we can run into with chains is that they're the sort of the same set of responses over and over. And when you think about an actual game in which you are playing with another person, you are talking about multiple conditional discriminations. You're not just engaging in a few responses and then you sort of start all over again. You're engaging in multiple responses. They're going to change based on the context that you are in. I mean, with basketball, you're running up and down the court. Maybe you're on defense. Maybe you're on offense. Are you passing? Are you catching? Like, what are you doing? And it's such a fast game too, much more than, say, even when we were talking about baseball. Even baseball, there are a lot of conditional discriminations, but it's relatively slow paced. You sort of, someone hits a ball and now you do something based on where the ball goes. Whereas basketball, it just constantly moves. There's not a lot of time to figure out what you're supposed to do. So I would think of this as probably not where you'd want to spend a lot of time in terms of chaining, because basketball is nice, but, maybe it's too complex to use our knowledge about chaining. But apparently it is not, as Lambert and colleagues found out in this very complicated, great results study. However, they spent a lot of time and it required so many people to get basketball to be learned. So maybe not something you're going to just be able to run, yourself in a school. But hey, you never know. Maybe you have the people around. I'll go through this one really quickly. So Lambert and colleagues mentioned that there had been some studies looking at video modeling to look at sort of free throwing. And Stacie, you mentioned like a game of horse had been something that your lab had worked on previously, teaching a game like horse, like a shooting game.
And really similar to this article. I mean, even though horse is a little slower paced than an actual game of baseball, there's actually still a lot of conditional discriminations that are happening there. So if the person before you made their basket, or if they didn't make their basket, if they, and so there's a bunch of spots where you kind of branch off. And I think that's where we get into trouble, is trying to teach a complex skill and thinking that we can break it down into a linear series of steps and to really kind of identify this is a complex skill. There are going to be branches in this. And each of those branches may hold a different chain. And we have to be ready to teach each of those branches and to get each of those branches under proper stimulus control.
Right.
So in this case, that same idea of, okay, let's look at the game of basketball. What are the chains involved? And the work being done here was done with just one participant, Marcel, who was a 13-year-old boy. He was already at this kind of university center receiving treatment for problem behaviors, stereotypic behavior. And his family had said, hey, while you're here, we feel bad because we're not able to engage a lot with Marcel in an activity that we as a family find to be entertaining, which was a game of basketball. So I guess on top of all this other stuff, the researcher said, you know what, let's throw that into the package too. So as a part of their overall treatment, they decided to teach Marcel to play basketball. And they took that idea of, okay, well, what are the chains in basketball? And they broke them down into 3 separate chains. One was the offense chain, one was a defense chain, and one was the drill. I don't quite know what I think that was more just like the shooting when I looked at the list. I don't know why they decided to call it the drill, but
do the drill.
But that's what they had.
I think I might need this intervention.
To learn how to play basketball?
Yeah,
me too.
There are diagrams, A goes here, B goes here. You need about 7 people to help you run this procedure. So it's not one that you can sort of throw together.
But that makes sense, though, because basketball is a team sport.
Exactly.
Right?
You would have that many people, but they need to all be Confederates.
Sure.
So in terms of teaching, they use their university rec center at the end of their appointments. So here are the Confederate players they had every time they wanted to run this procedure. They had Marcel, of course. They had multiple grad students. They had a BCBA. A BCBA-D was there as well, I guess, to serve as the point guard, just who happened to be there in the study.
Ds are good at that.
That's what they're known for. Yeah. And D is for defense.
Yes, exactly.
And then, of course, Marcel's father and brother. So they need a lot of people to field a team. And like I said, they were looking at those 3 response chains with lots of the conditional discriminations at contextually appropriate times. So they had this half-court sequence for offense. They had a half-court sequence for defense. So again, if you're on one side of the court, you're playing offense. If you're on the opposite side of the court, you're playing defense. And then the drill, which was a full-court offensive sequence. Step 1 was looking at... So within each of those 3 chains, they broke down into lots of other skills that they considered prerequisites. Things like, can Marcel pass? Can he get open? So when someone says get open, understanding what get open means, recruiting attention and catching the ball.
Say you're open.
Shooting, dribbling, covering an opponent, running with the opponent, covering an opponent if they have the ball versus when they don't have the ball. And of course, rebounding.
And isn't that the approach that would be taken in typical kids basketball training, right?
You would think, but sometimes I'm in public schools a lot, and you'll kind of watch gym, and they'll sort of be like, okay, I think everyone knows how to play, and go.
Maybe not gym, but maybe if they're on the basketball team, right, they're going to have practices where they're going to practice specific skills first and get those skills until they can incorporate them later into a chain, right? Yep,
that same idea, exactly. Breaking down your skills. So I'm not going to get into teaching the prerequisites because that was pretty much, it was, discrete trial training. They have a very elaborate, if you want to see how elaborate you might need to be for some of these chains, they have a very specific definitions. They talk about how they taught the skill, how they described it. They have multiple diagrams, so A1 goes to this cone, and then A2 will go to this cone. And when you want to get open, you go from cone A to cone B. It's very...
A is Marcel, B is Marcel's opponent, AA is Marcel's teammate, BB is opponent of Marcel's teammate.
It's not exactly complicated, but it does require a lot of forethought. Like, they didn't just throw this together. Okay, Marcel, let's just kind of hang out, I'll go over this way. It was very scripted in terms of how the opponents, how the teammates were supposed to perform, given the different parts of the chain.
And I actually don't know basketball, but they have it beautifully laid out in this wonderful table.
A lot of tables.
Yeah, the tables are very helpful. The diagrams are helpful. I want to just print those out and take myself to the courts.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have a little laminated cheat sheet.
Yeah.
hang on.
Hold on one
guys. I'm B1. Why aren't you over there? Where's my cone?
The prerequisite, we're sort of a basic discrete trial training program. The key part was then taking all those prerequisites and then putting them into the more complex chains. So again, offense, in case anyone wants to know how to play offense, first you will pass, then you get open, then you recruit attention and catch the ball and it's passed to you, then you dribble, and then you shoot.
You lost me.
Offense is when you have the ball because it's round like a ball.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, it's like you're
Sport.
It's an offensive. You're attacking.
You have the ball.
You have the ball. Your team has the ball. And for each of these chains, they had an SD that they would start with for practice. So in that case, was take the ball out. I don't know why they chose that. I would have said something like, "All right, we got it's offense. Let's do offense."
Because that's what people scream.
Take the ball out.
Take the ball out.
Yeah, because you're on the
heard that.
yeah, because you're on the other side of the court. If that's a basketball court, yep. Other side of the basketball court, and you're taking it out to the side that you want to be on.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard for a touchdown.
I've actually heard this. I've actually heard the take the ball out.
Okay. So
that's a real thing.
That's apparently a real term.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. With defense, they had the chain was cover opponent when they don't have the ball, run with their opponent, cover their opponent when they get the ball, then run with the opponent again, then rebound, and again under the control of, I have heard this one, cover him or her. And then finally the drill. So you pass the ball, get open and recruit attention to catch the ball. And this one they'd repeat 3 times. So you had to kind of pass and then move and get attention. And I'm open and get the ball and then pass and go back and forth 3 times. And then you would shoot. And again, they used the very weird do the drill. It's like do the do. They had all sorts of cones. They had different colored jerseys for the different teams. They had an iPad was sort of chipped from an MSWO, so they'd give Marcel access to the iPad when they moved through the chain. And basically, they would kind of they did not follow your advice, Stacie. They were doing forward chain and then completing all the steps within the chain. Maybe Marcel was into basketball. They kind of described him as not really liking some of these activities, but they got through all these activities pretty well, so perhaps he showed more interest and they wanted to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Perhaps they just had so many people that were getting bored. Maybe the other experimenters were bored and they wanted to play repeatedly. Who knows? But they decided to move through the chain.
I picture this happening on everyone's lunch break, right?
Yeah.
They're like, come on down. We gotta play a game real
fast.
It certainly
and
could.
teach Marcel all at the same time.
Yeah. And it was always at the end of Marcel's other therapies and other treatment. They used a 5-second constant time delay procedure where they'd have kind of like the most intrusive prompt, and then during that first trial, and then their training step, and if they made an error, they'd sort of go back to that prompt. But if he was engaging in correct responding for 3 consecutive trials, they'd delay the prompt by 5 seconds. If they had 2 errors, then they kind of go back to the previous step. Very similar to, and they actually mentioned they used the New England Center for Children Core Skills Assessment. And then when I read the procedure, I was like, wait a minute, that's how I was taught to teach chaining back when I worked at the New England Center for Children. So I'm wondering if one of these...
Joe.
Oh, he was there?
Yeah.
I don't think I knew him.
Hey,
we
Joe.
both supervised him.
Oh,
and
okay.
we were friends with him. Hey, Joe.
Okay. So this is old hat. So he was kind of going back to the treatment plan that he knew.
He has a clinic at Vanderbilt as well, and the clinic uses the ACE.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
That would explain why they used the core skills assessment. They ran the probes because, again, they were looking to see if there were any practice effects. So if they prompted through the untrained steps, did Marcel learn any of the steps in the chain? And, he did some. Basically, in that phase, Marcel was able to, surprise, surprise, they wouldn't have published this if he learned none of the chains and then could not play basketball. But really the only part of the chain that he seemed to have trouble with, where they had to kind of adapt the forward chaining procedure, the cones had to be removed at a certain step, at sort of step 5 in the chain. But other than that, it sounds like it just sort of went pretty smoothly in terms of Marcel learning the different steps of the chain. And then interestingly enough, when they expected to have some sort of additional conditional discrimination training, he seemed to spontaneously just understand when they did one pickup game at the end, and he seemed to understand when he was supposed to play offense, when he was supposed to play defense, without additional prompting in that. So,
I mean, this may be there's probably quite a bit of learning history going on here. If his family values playing basketball, I'm pretty sure they've tried potentially to have him play basketball. I already brought him to the court at one point or another. So maybe that.
He may have had experience.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't know all the prerequisites, though. So, who knows?
I love the study. I think this is, obviously it can lay out a blueprint for specifically teaching basketball, but I think that it's more than that, and that it really makes some great points in that, hey, it's complicated to teach complex skills. Mm. And when there are conditional discriminations and even then branches of chains, then you have to lay all that, you have to teach it all, and I think too often we try to like push something like basketball into this kind of linear sequence, and this makes a nice point of like, well, there's a lot to it, and yes, it took a lot of time, and yes, it was very complicated, but look at the benefits that can come from this, right? So you've got someone that now has something that they can do with their family, with friends. You have a wonderful activity that they can use to access varied reinforcement in all sorts of different contexts moving forward in their life. Like this will take up a good chunk of that 60% of unstructured downtime as an adult. You have opportunities for social interactions and learning social skills. You have opportunities for learning new skills. So this is just, I think, a really nice way to provide some richness to this young man's life, and in my mind, worth every minute that they spent on it.
Yeah, and it seemed like the hardest part of the whole study was sort of conceptualizing, well, what are the different chains in basketball, and how are we going to teach each of these individual skills, and then how are we going to chain those individual skills together? That seemed like it probably took the longest. I don't want to say the greatest amount of time, but in terms of the overall chaining procedure, once you get, if you're reading the article, once you get into the actual procedure of teaching, it's pretty straightforward. It was the same type of prompting that you would have done if it had been, okay, Marcel, let's stack these Lego blocks. There wasn't a lot different other than just the responses they were expecting were just much more complex.
But this may or may not have been the chains that they initially started with. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's an important point to make, is that you do need to put time into task analyzing and breaking these chains down into their component parts. But some of those divides that we create between steps are arbitrary, and it may be too big of a gap for someone to go from one step to the next. Or you might be too detailed and they might be able to skip over a couple at a time. And so I think it's important not to be married to the initial task analysis that you create, and to be observant of how the individual is going through the chain and modify as you go through as needed. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think we're kind of at a good point to move into dissemination station. Oh, there it is.
That's how it happens.
That's a machine, right?
Yep. That's a machine.
That's a real train.
Julius, I want you to play that one more time with an echo, add some reverb. Stacie, as our guest, so we've got people who now should understand, if they didn't before, that chaining can be used for miraculous results almost. You can chain
if you put the work in. Right. If you put the work in, it's miraculous.
You put the work in. If you wanted maybe a newer practitioner or a BCBA who sort of shied away from really looking at the use of chaining procedures,
or was only doing total tasks.
What would be the main take-home points if they could only learn 3 things about chaining after listening to this episode? What would be the 3 that you would say, aha, these, you're going to be 100% better than you were yesterday?
Can I repeat what I've already said? So I think keeping in mind what you're doing is one. So that you're creating a chain, that you're adding these links one onto another, and to think of it that way. And so it doesn't matter if you're doing forward or if you're doing backward. Don't get so caught up in that. You're just creating these steps in which one serves as an SD for the next step and the reinforcer for the last step, right? So I think understanding the basic concept of what you're doing is important. 2, mass trials, running mass trials of the behavior chain and the training procedure. And then if you get stuck, pulling out a step with its previously mastered step and running mass trials of that and then reinserting it back into the chain. And then, I think the third piece that I would say is a good take home is that these are complex skills that you are teaching in a sea of other complex skills, and you can't waste time. So turn to the literature and consider these different procedural variations, but make sure that you are getting the most bang for your buck out of the training time that you're putting towards this. So if you have someone that's not benefiting from observational learning, then don't bother with it and just get in the mass trials, teach over and over and over again to create these chains.
I think we've all seen the situations where someone's been working on a really long, complex behavior chain like toothbrushing or hand washing or showering for years.
If it's taking years, there's a problem.
Right.
It shouldn't take years. And it's probably that no one's going to learn a complex chain by having a couple trials a week.
Yeah. Exactly.
We have a study we're doing right now in my lab where we're looking at using virtual reality to run mass trials for community-based skills.
Cool.
Hey. The most important thing is that you're getting in mass trials of this.
Mm-hmm. I think it's sad that so many individuals find some of the running these training procedures kind of aversive, and I think sometimes that's what you'll get with the I ran toothbrushing. Okay, how many times? I ran it once. And then maybe I'll run it one more time next week. It's like, if that was going to be enough for an individual to learn how to brush their teeth, they wouldn't require a chaining procedure to learn it. They would have just figured it out because everyone brushes their teeth once or twice a day.
And if you have someone that has, if you have someone that has 14 different complex chains that they're learning at the same time across leisure and self-help and whatever else you're trying to teach them, that's probably too many and it's too spread out, and you'd be better off dropping 12 or 13 of those and focusing all of that time on one chain and finishing it and then putting it into maintenance and running something else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think that's bringing us to the end of our show. Stacie, thank you so very much for being here.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
It was great. I'm glad our schedules worked out. We had you to talk about chaining. Do you have any fun Babbitt information you wanna share here?
Yes. How long do we have? Another hour?
Yeah.
Okay. Probably I'll just go with the most exciting Babbitt thing, which is this is a very big year for us. We are turning 40.
Whoa!
We look great.
Almost over the hill.
We are turning 40 this year, and we are celebrating in style at our new venue October 2nd through 4th. We are going to be at the DCU Center in Worcester. So we are leaving our old home in Amherst. But in so doing, we are going to have room for you and about 1,999 of your closest behavior analyst friends.
I have a lot of friends.
We have room for about 40 or 50 vendors this year. It's going to be a really great event. We've got the top people in the field coming to this conference. So maybe you guys can come, and been trying to get for a while to come do a show.
Yeah, we'd love that.
We would be on board.
That'd be so fun.
So, Stacie, at the DCU Center, will Bruce Springsteen also be playing at the Babbitt? Have a stage to the side, maybe?
I'm going to say that's possible. That could happen.
The power of imagination makes anything possible.
Telling me there's a chance.
Well, we will definitely miss UMass Amherst, but when your conference turns into the equivalent of trying to get tickets to the Bruce Springsteen show, it's time to move to new digs.
We're growing. There's a lot of us, and there's a lot of us in Massachusetts, and there's only going to be more of us, and so we really want to provide a home for everyone to come once a year, and it's nice to do something in person, but if you can't do it in person, we also have live streaming now. So
that seemed to work super well this past year.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Got a fancy setup.
New take for us. Yeah.
Nice.
Before we break, I want to make sure that if you were listening and would like to order continuing education credits for listening to the show, you get your second secret code word, and it is shoulder. 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 That's a hard one to spell. Shoulder.
I have 2 of them.
You have 2 shoulders.
Put your head on my
shoulder. That's good. Some intraverbals there, huh? Shoulder. Oh boy. Well, that brings us to the end of an exciting episode all about chaining. Podcasting's all like chaining now. It's my SD to do our little spiel at the end. We hope you enjoyed listening to ABA Inside Track. If you did, why not think about subscribing to the show? Maybe leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to the show. You can also find us everywhere for social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com. You can also find these episodes posted on YouTube with the YouTube subtitle function. And feel free to email us at any time with any interesting feedback or topic ideas at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. And Stacie, if folks want to, I don't know if registration's, it's probably not up yet.
Probably opening in June.
Okay, registration will be up pretty soon.
So we'll have emails, but don't miss it.
All right, where can they go? Where can folks go to the Babbitt website?
Babbitt.org is the website, and you can also like us and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Babbitt question, you can send it to my Bab email, or any question you can send to my Bab email, which is pretty easy, except that it's hard to spell my name. Stacie@babbitt.org, and that's STACIE @babbitt.org. Thanks,
Excellent.
Mom and Dad, for giving me a really tough spelling of Steve.
Well, thank you, Jackie and Diana. Thank you so much, Stacie. It was great to have you all here.
Yay, it was fun.
We'll be back next week with another full-length episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye!